Welcome to office hours for the last week in September. So on these final Fridays of the month, we usually have a special topic for the session. And today we're going to talk about Volunteers for Salesforce, specifically the Volunteers for Salesforce app. So I'm delighted to welcome a panel of volunteer super users to the session today. Many of whom are joining the panel for the first time. So thank you very much for having your arm twisted. And also welcome to anyone who's joining us on the call for the first time. So please note that none of the panel, including myself, actually work for salesforce.org. We do these sessions within the community and we volunteer our time because we love talking about Salesforce and we love sharing our knowledge here and in the Power of Us Hub and in our own orgs or communities. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the way that this works is that if you have questions, please put them in the chat first. Then we can see what's coming up and we'll try and answer them in the order that we receive them. You just need to put a few details, brief details, and then we'll call on you when we come to answer the question. So thank you, Roger, for kicking us off and getting going. Since there are a lot of you on the call, please would you keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking about a question or an answer. And I'll go through in a minute and mute anyone who hasn't yet. We tend to find that people have background noise, so please keep your mic muted unless you're speaking. Let's see, this session is being recorded and I'll post the link into the Power of Us Hub. And then just a couple of quick notes. So I think today we are going to be Lightning versus Classic agnostic. I know that somebody has asked some questions about that. We know that the Volunteers app and the documentation surrounding the app have been updated to use the Lightning interface, but a lot of us installed and set up this app before Lightning existed even. So the format may have changed. It's the same app underneath. And also, we know that not all of you are NPSP or HEDA users because Volunteers for Salesforce does come kind of built in with your trial, but you can use the app with any Salesforce install. And I'm particularly going to welcome any Patron Manager users who are on the call today because it's nice to have you join one of our sessions. Finally, this isn't intended to be a demo or an overview of the app. I'm sure we're going to cover a lot of ground in this discussion and we'll touch on quite a lot of features, but we're not planning any formal show and tell today before we get into questions. So we're going to assume that you've already done some basic setup perhaps, that you've looked at some of the details of the app and maybe experimented a bit with it. If you're coming to this app for the very first time, this session may not be as useful for you, but please start with the excellent documentation and the resources on the website of the developer, David Habib. So that's enough of the introductions, I think. It's great that there are some questions coming in chat, but I'm going to start with, I'm going to just start the conversation going. I did warn the panel about this. I'm going to give each of them an opportunity to talk about what their favorite feature of the app is either supplied with it or a feature that you've customized to work specifically for your organization. So would anyone like to go first and just talk about their favorite feature? And then we'll dive into some questions and then we'll come back to somebody else's favorite. Who'd like to, on the panel, what's your favorite thing about Volunteers? Anybody?
I guess I can go. Hi, my name's Allie Taberer. I'm a part-time employee of Patron Technology on their education team. And then I also have a full-time job where I'm about to start implementing the NPSP for my full-time organization. My favorite feature of Volunteers for Salesforce is definitely the ability to schedule shifts, because I've found that to be incredibly flexible for several use cases, not only for specific shifts of volunteers all doing the same thing but on different days or times, but also for signing people up for things that are time dependent. So at my previous employer, I worked for a theater, and we allowed people who wanted to audition for us to sign up for their audition times online using a tweaked version of Volunteers for Salesforce. So I love shifts, and I would be happy to talk a lot about that.
That's great. Thanks, Ali. I wonder whether any of the panel had personal sites as their favorite feature, because then maybe we can get a bit into Roger's question. Let's see. Thank you, Carmen and Stephen, for starting to pick that up. Go on.
I was going to say that was the site. I mean, when we talk about Salesforce development and flexibility, just the simple fact that you can enable Salesforce site and have code and have a template and basically have a lot of the development work, at least the shell, built out for you is amazing. And also to follow up with the sites, but the technology of allowing fields to be displayed or removed based on field sets. I think those two components are really enabling not only just self-implementing of Volunteers for Salesforce, but the ability to grow and to make changes. Obviously, there are limitations, but that for me is a really huge leap when we talk about Salesforce development with a managed package.
And for any of you who haven't really seen a personal site, this is a cobbled together one. I don't actually volunteer as much as this slide looks like, but if you can see my screen, this was something that Ali and I put together for a demo recently. So Roger said he was having problems setting it up, and it kept let's see, we'll go back to his question. I was having trouble setting it up. I'm getting an error message where the link to my personal site page keeps forwarding back to the personal site lookup page. So yes, any thoughts? Because the personal sites are great, but they can be a little tricky to set up in the first place. Any ideas on what may be going on?
This is Steve Judd. I'm with the University of New Hampshire. One of the things that is a feature of personal sites, so if typically and originally personal sites just required you to include the contact ID in the URL, and that would log someone into the personal site. And the only problem with that from sort of a security privacy area is that that is theoretically guessable. So if I had one personal site URL, I could just play around with the contact ID value and get into someone else's personal site. They're not meant to be super secure, but that is seemingly an issue. So there's a feature where you can require that both the contact ID and the contact's email are required to access the personal site. And that way, the only way someone would be able to sort of hack into someone else's personal site is they'd have to know both their email and the contact ID. So it makes sort of the URL hacking perspective untenable for people. If you have the personal site set up to require both the contact ID and the email, and you don't include the email in the URL, then it will take you to the lookup window. And I believe you also have to customize the email that gets sent out when someone enters their personal contact info requesting the URL to include that email parameter in the URL that gets sent out. So hopefully that makes sense. That is a potential problem with what Roger was talking about. If I go to one of my personal sites and remove the email from the URL, I get redirected to the lookup page.
Does that get to your question, Roger? Do you think that does help? And yes, you're right, Stephen, isn't it, that there's basically for your volunteers, you can customize a link, can't you, that includes the correct parameters and send it out in an email, and there's instructions about how to do that.
Right, and what happens is if you try and go to that page without the proper information, if it doesn't recognize you as an existing contact, then it will take you to the personal site lookup form where you fill in the form, click submit. Salesforce will generate an email to the submitter with their personal link. So you just need to make sure that that email that's getting sent out, and I don't know off the top of my head which email template you need to change, but you need to change that email template to make sure it's including the email if you're also requiring that in the URL.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, no, I would just, sorry, I was just going to say to Roger, and Roger, right? Yeah, you've probably done this, but whenever I've run into an issue with the setup or especially with the URLs and the build, just go back and read through the documentation, because David Habib did, and I don't know if he still does, but he did an amazing job of documenting the steps, and it's a little bit arduous to go back over, but honestly, it's probably caught 99% of the errors that I've made personally. So I would just urge you to do that one more time, and just to make sure you have everything in line from the documentation.
Stephen and Carmen, do you both use personal sites with your organization?
We don't at the University of Colorado. It's just one of the applications I've worked on for years, and I really enjoy it.
Okay.
Yeah, and here we do. We've really only in the last 6 months or so have we dived into it deeply. There were some limitations to it before, and the University of New Hampshire, through the group that's using the Stewardship Network, basically sponsored some development that added some features to it. So one of the things in the personal sites, and this addresses a question I think Natalia had, is that there's an area where people can report hours. So you don't have that on your screenshot there, but you can have a tab that allows users to report hours. And so we have a number of volunteers that we don't really control when they work. They're doing volunteer work in a community. And so we need to be able to allow them to sort of say, yes, I performed this work on this date, here's what I did. And so again, we sponsored development to allow us to add a field set to the volunteer hours that shows up on that form, so we can ask additional information besides just the number of hours that they worked. And so to Natalia's question, what you need to do if you're going to do that is you create a job that the dates don't particularly matter, and assign a person. You create one volunteer hours record with 0 hours for that person, and then when they go into their personal site, they're able to report against that.
That's great. I wonder if that also comes back to a little bit, perhaps with. Oh no, we'll come back to Ian's question later. So I see what you mean. It's allowing people to basically. You said you created a volunteer hours record that starts off as 0 hours, and then they add the hours as they do them.
Yeah, well, there's like a second configuration feature that we had added.
Yeah.
By default, if you enable people to report hours, they can report hours against any job in the system. And we didn't want that because, as anyone who's used it much recognizes, that you get an awfully long list of jobs that don't really pertain to the person. So there is also a setting where you can say only allow people to report hours against jobs that they have been assigned. And that basically means that they have a volunteer hours record for that job already. And someone asked about, can you not let people do that? And the answer is yes. Like in the screenshot you have, you don't have the link to let people report hours. It would be in the menu up towards the top. So you can, when you, if you customize your volunteer personal site template, you can control what links are in that menu.
And you can also, I think, put it separately on your website, can't you? That there's a page they can go to report their hours.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, interesting. And I should click to the second slide here, which is actually the second part of the page, which is where you see the shifts that are coming up. Okay, so that's great. Thank you very much for all of that, Stephen. That's fabulous. Let's go back up a little bit. We covered Natalia's question. Yes, with this idea of tracking volunteer tasks that don't have to occur at specific times. Do you have to, panel, do you have to use personal sites for volunteer tasks that don't occur at specific times? Are there other ways to deal with that if you have sort of recurring volunteers and you don't necessarily want to use personal sites? Any other things that you've done?
So this is Steve again. We haven't done that without other tools. So there are other tools that integrate with Salesforce, like form assembly, that allow you to sort of build arbitrary forms that connect into Salesforce. And so you could create a form that lets you just create hours, you know, for a person. But I think natively, I don't know of any way that you could do that otherwise without the personal sites feature.
Yeah, I think the only way I was thinking is if you, and I caution this, maybe somebody has done this on the line, but if you've actually pulled the the code from GitHub, there's open, you know, you can grab all that code and modify and manage it yourself and build and take away things like that, but you're losing out in the managed package aspect. So, but I have heard of people doing that, taking certain components of it and rebuilding based on their needs.
Great, thank you very much. I think that the next question that came up was one that Ian Hooley sent just to the organizers. So let me read it out so everyone can hear it. When you're creating a job recurrence schedule, can you mass edit the job shifts so that you can add one volunteer to all of the shifts in the job recurrence schedule? We only see a way where you're required to create or to edit each individual shift. If the person who's going to answer this could just explain for everyone else's benefit briefly what a job recurrence schedule is, that would be great. So, okay, well, let's start with, anybody use the job recurrence feature? Because I have to say, when I saw Ian's question somewhere else yesterday, I was thinking, oh, can you mass edit people to shifts? And I'm really not sure. But...
Hi, I'm Drew Moran. I'm the manager of volunteers at Lakeview Pantry.
Hi,
and
Drew.
we do,
Thanks
in
for
fact,
joining us.
we do in fact use job recurring schedules and volunteer recurring schedules at my organization. I guess my brief answer to that is that we have volunteer recurring schedules that we create that correspond to the jobs already created. Am I understanding that correctly? I guess we don't have the person asking the question here with us, do we?
Yes, Ian is here and I've unmuted him. So, Ian, can you give us a little more detail?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
I can.
Okay, great, thanks. When we are creating the jobs and we create first we create the job and then we create the job reoccurrence schedule. When we're what we're finding is that you have to go into each individual shift, and we would love to be able to create the job reoccurrence schedule and then add one volunteer that we know is who has agreed to do all those shifts. Because there could be 22 shifts. Yeah.
So as was asked, a job recurring schedule allows you to create a job on a regular basis. So you would first create a volunteer job, an object or a volunteer job, and then you would schedule it, say, every Monday from 9 to 5. What you can also do is on, at least in my instance, on a contact page, you can create a recurring schedule for a volunteer and then match it to a job, and then it matches it to that job recurring schedule. So the short term is a VRS, a volunteer recurring schedule, and then you can match those up with jobs.
Great. Yeah, I saw VRS. I just didn't know exactly how it was all tied in. So I understood the JRS. I just didn't see where VRS was built.
Got it. Okay, and they work very similarly. What ends up happening though, and can be difficult, is when you might know if you change a job recurring schedule, it kind of screws with the pattern. The same thing with a volunteer recurring schedule. If you go in to create a volunteer recurring schedule, you can select the job and the times, and it will automatically populate that volunteer into those jobs.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Of course.
Fabulous. Thank you very much indeed for helping out on that, Drew. Drew, what's your favorite feature then of Volunteers for Salesforce? Is the recurring schedules one of them?
Well, we wouldn't be able to do it without them. We have about, I'd say about 500 to 800 regular volunteers and about 3,000 total volunteers through corporate groups, faith groups, things like that at our organization. So I've got over 80, probably about 120 recurring volunteer schedules that we set up for people who come in on a regular basis. My favorite feature about Volunteers for Salesforce, though, is the reporting capability. We have a very aggressive strategic plan at our organization, and how customizable it is really great, because I can report not only on how many volunteer hours I have, but if I have a checkbox on the contact page that says that someone is a volunteer who helps us with a specific job, I can create a report that shows, okay, here are all the volunteer hours for the year. Here are all of the volunteer hours of people who completed this specific job. I've automated all of my reporting so that every month when I report to my supervisor, I just run that report and send it over to them.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I think there was a question somewhere on reporting. Thank you very much for your contribution, Drew, because I think Rita picked it up in chat. Rita, can you unmute yourself and tell us a little bit more about the reporting that you're doing? Who did what job and how many hours? Are you in a quieter place now? Rita. Oh. I tried to unmute her. I think we may have temporarily lost Rita. I think she had a scheduling conflict, but when she comes back, that would be great. Okay, let's see. Great for those who've been picking up. Thank you, team, about questions about licensing and about whether the volunteers need a license, and I think Keith about installation. So yes, let's just clarify. If you're the app is standalone. If you're an recent MPSP user, it will have come in your trial. Carmen, it is basically free to use, but I think it only comes with the very basic configuration kind of when you install it, don't you? So there's quite a lot of time if you want to get it really up and running and working for your organization, isn't there?
Yes.
Oh, okay, Ali, you jumped
Sorry,
in.
I'm not calling it.
No, that's fine.
Go for it.
Talk, Ali.
So yes, there is quite a bit of a time investment to put in when you're first configuring things. But like I think has been referenced before, the configuration guide is very good. And I think that anyone who's at least been in the system or been in Salesforce for a little bit of time can do it. It will just take them, the amount of time it will take you just varies based on how long you've been working with Salesforce. I did it as a very new admin who didn't really know what I was doing most of the time for the first time. And I was able to make it through with only a few hiccups I was able to ask those in the Power of Us Hub and get those solved very quickly. So yes, the time investment's definitely worth it to make it running for your organization, but it does take some time. So don't rush yourself through it.
Carmen, would you like to, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it either. I mean, if you haven't done much Salesforce configuration, especially with managed apps and with sites, it gets a little bit tricky, especially letting, so, there's a site guest user profile that you have to open up to. Implementation partners for sure can tackle this, but anyone who's an aspiring admin on Salesforce, or if you've already been doing that, like Ali said, sit down, take your time, have a screen with the documentation and go ahead and play in the sandbox. And it's some of it's a little bit longer than other areas, but you have the hub and you have a lot of different articles to lean on. And then once you accomplish your first site and have someone log in, it's pretty nice and it feels good.
You're right. It's a very good way to learn about some of these hidden features, isn't it? Sort of how sites work, how guest users work, that kind of thing. Let's go back, Carmen, to a question which I think you picked up in chat, Ashley's question, which was way back. Sorry, it's right up at the top of the chat. And she's asking questions about, she asks about using volunteer opportunities on a calendar. She's using the calendar in Salesforce. And then she wants to know if she can set up those same opportunities to show up on her website, though she specifically says her website's monthly calendar, or is it vice versa? Could one of you talk a little bit about how the publishing of jobs and shifts, works out to your website?
Go ahead.
So there's a few ways that you can publish that are built into the app. There's and I might miss one or two. There's the volunteer jobs with the field sets built in that you can publish jobs and shifts. There's the volunteer calendar, which has a calendar style view of its own. And you can also have a page for volunteers to just express interest that they're interested in volunteering for you, and that's already built into the package. Have I forgotten any off the top of? I'm trying to pull up the documentation to make sure that I haven't forgotten any.
But can you explain a little bit about, because you're talking about publishing, which is great.
Yeah.
So how does that work? Do you set things up? Do you need to set it up on your website, or are you setting it up in Salesforce? And then how does publishing work in general? Kalman, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't get confused with integrating it with your existing calendars, right? So the Salesforce sites pages are, it really is Salesforce. It's built on Salesforce. It's force.com platform. So it's not your WordPress site or your Drupal site, but it can integrate into your site via an iframe, basically, just a simple little widget to go into your existing website. So I think the question initially was, can I integrate the Salesforce volunteers for Salesforce calendar into my website calendar, which I believe the answer is no, unless you do additional configuration, things like that. It would be a separate jobs calendar, which again is built on the Force.com platform. Was that the initial question? Just to make sure we're going down the right road?
Yes, I believe so.
That was right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then you can, on each record inside, and I think in terms of publishing, you can determine if it's being displayed on the website or not, and if it's displaying in the calendar or not. One thing I would say is if you're not using the job calendar and you're using the standard sites template, you can't hide it. At least I don't think you can hide it. So some people find that a little bit confusing, right? So you have the job calendar tab. And if you're not using, for example, if you're I don't know, a project management organization and you just want people to sign up to do web development or I don't know, some kind of trainings, you may not have a specific day or time. So that calendar link may be a little bit confusing to some people. But let me know if there's anyone who wants to jump in. I know there's definitely some people on the call too who have experience with this.
And I mean, it's the same with both the calendar and the forms, isn't it? That actually you sort of set everything up in Salesforce and then you're publishing them. Anybody just quickly want to mention iframes?
Yeah, this is Steve. I'll talk about it. Essentially, all of the volunteers for Salesforce information lives within Salesforce or within the volunteers site, which is managed by Salesforce. And so what you need to do is iframe those pages. And when iframe is, if you want to think about it, is on any web page, it's a window into another web page. So it's a way of embedding a web page within a web page. So on your site where you want the calendar to appear or where you want the list of jobs to appear, you would put an iframe in that. That'll work with most content management systems if you have the proper permissions. So if you use WordPress or you use Drupal or something else, or standard HTML, you can put that in there. The one challenge with that is that iframes don't always behave very well on mobile devices. So you may have to do some strange things, like in a iframe, you tell it how wide and how long that iframe should be. And so you sometimes need to do things like, say, instead of a pixel width, say that it's 100% wide, and then it will sort of adapt to mobile a little bit better. The other thing I will say is that there is, folks have extended volunteers for Salesforce, for instance, to be able to create a feed of calendar events that can then be more customized on a website, although I don't think that's publicly available now. It was a developer called Daisy Logics that did that. They did some development for us on some other stuff, and so that's one possibility, if it's something that's really important to someone, is that they get additional development help to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it? Thank you for that. Go ahead.
I'm looking right now. I haven't used it yet, but there's a great company. And I've been in touch with them a little bit. They're going to present at the Denver Boulder Nonprofit User Group, but there's a mobile app, and they definitely filled the gap, because you're right that the iframes are going to behave differently on mobile devices, and so there is an app. If anybody knows the link to it on the App Exchange, that would be wonderful. I'm looking for it now, but it's a great company that's basically extending volunteers for Salesforce to mobile. So again, I haven't used it personally, but I've looked at it. Yeah.
I think, Kalman, if you just Google V4S Mobile, the company, it's something that you'll come up with, DFTLY. I think that's
there
it.
There it is. Yep.
Yeah.
I found it. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's probably easier to go to their webpage than necessarily their App Exchange listing. But
LED.
yeah, it's a really yes, for anyone who hasn't come across this one, I think one of the first things they wanted to do was to give volunteers a way that they could check in and out of shifts using their phones. Though there's also, I believe, a sort of tablet version, so whoever is managing the shifts can actually swipe volunteers in and out. So that's one of its kind of main things. Fantastic. Yes, if you, there we go. Jenny has posted the link for us. Thank you very much to, yes, DFTLY, definitely V4S Mobile. And that, I believe there's a sort of starter version, which is free, depending on how many volunteers and how many people you have checking in and out. You may have to pay something for that as it gets more complicated. Thank you. Let's pick up. There's been an ongoing conversation with Elizabeth Trumbull in chat, but is asking some questions about email and updating of email. Sorry, I'm looking for the questions, but I think, Ali, you've been kind of following the conversation with Elizabeth. So can you please talk a little bit about what Elizabeth is asking and what we've...
Yes. So Elizabeth Caroline, could you try and unmute her so she can talk?
I'm unmuted, I think.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Do you want to just go ahead and address your question then? Because you would do it far better than me.
Sure. So we tried to implement volunteers for Salesforce last year, but there was actually a feature request that needed to be added. We imported, we are in the same situation as the gentleman from Lakeview Pantry. We have about 500 regular volunteers, over 3,000 volunteers that have volunteered at least once in the last year. And we have varying data quality, as you can imagine, of email addresses for those 3,500 people. So what would happen is if we went in, when we had the sites, the ability to go online and register for a job, if they put an email address in the form on the site, it would not overwrite the email addresses we had already in the contact records. And so they're like, I gave you my new email address. And we're like, well, it doesn't match any of the email addresses we have. And it just kind of became, we literally had to shut it down and go back to Sign Up Genius. So I just want to know if that's been fixed, anyway.
I'll just ask a follow-up. I mean, this is an interesting, there are, so number one, that the thing that comes to mind is, of course, there are, if you're using MPSP, there are some workflow updates that may be activated depending on which email field you have filled out on the record or that's being filled out. And you've probably looked into those and also what email field you're talking about when you exposed it. Is it the standard email field or personal work?
Yeah. You give me any email field. When I went to Dave, he was like, "There's no email field for which this works." So if you can tell me an email field that it does work for, we'll just use that. I mean, I'm really not picky. I just want to find some way that a person can enter an email address, and that becomes like, I don't care really what I've got to do, that I can capture that and know that it's somewhere.
So I'm wondering. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I was just, so you're talking about in the personal site itself. So they've sort of gotten into their own personal site and they try and update the email there.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry. No, it would be.
You're talking about they sign up to volunteer.
Yes, exactly.
Well, so the problem is that when they sign up to volunteer, the Volunteers for Salesforce looks at the email address that they entered and says, do I have a contact with that email address?
It actually, it technically matches on first name, last name, email address, if I remember right.
Exactly. It does first name, last name, email address. And if it gets a match on first name and last name, it doesn't go to email address.
Right. So you can configure that. You can configure that, but
I don't know if that's. Can you modify that?
It's in the custom settings. I just looked at it this morning.
Yeah, right. But I don't think you can modify it, even though it's available to be modified. I think I asked David Habib at one point last year.
Yeah.
Something similar.
I mean, he told me last year it was a feature request. I just didn't know if it had been implemented. I couldn't find anywhere that it had. And if one of you guys have a workaround for it, even better.
So I could tell you what we did when, I'm sorry, this is Drew again. When we created Volunteers for Salesforce, we used it initially internally, and we didn't have the volunteer sign up. But when we started again, when we started using volunteer sign up in the personal sites and stuff like that on our website, I believe what we did is created a brand new email field, a different one than our original one, and had all of our volunteers sign up online, and then use those new contact records as our volunteer records. So it was just a different field altogether, a new email field that wouldn't check against the standard email field.
And you were able to capture the new email field?
I believe that we,
okay.
In the field sets, when we created the field sets for the information that we collect from the new volunteer sign up, we just created a field that was different from our original field, or changed the old email. And then in that new field, just collected all the information separately, if I'm remembering correctly.
We'll try that. Thank you.
So did you end up with any duplicates, Drew, or was that, I mean, because it was a brand new instance, you were mostly collecting people for the first time?
What I can say is, are you already, is it Elizabeth, are you already tracking volunteer hours?
Yes, and we're doing just what you did. We manually enter that rate. So we elicit volunteers through email and other means, and then our director goes into mass edit and manually enters their hours.
Okay. And let me get this right. When you have their emails in the standard email field, and then when they put their first name, last name, and email in, it's not deduping and collecting them?
That's correct. It says, oh, I've got Elizabeth Trumbull, and I'm really smart. I already know her email address, so I'm ignoring what she just entered.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah, that seems weird. That seems weird. It seems like it should be either creating a new lead or a new contact when someone does that. Not, I'm pretty sure the matching is either they match or they don't. There's not like, well,
It
first and last
matches.
name match, but but in the contact matching rule that's like up on the screen right now, it says first name, last name, email. All three of those have to match.
Mm-hmm.
And if all three of those don't match, then it creates a new record, either a new contact record or a new lead record. So we do have that issue that someone signs up and all of a sudden now we have two contacts for the same person, but something is different between them. And so you have to deal with deduping those. But I have not seen it where it just sort of ignores, one of those matching rule fields.
I'll go double check that our contact matching rule is the way you have yours. So maybe something changed. Thank you so much.
And so the only other thing on top of that would be the permissions on, like if you had a contact matching rule that just was first name, last name, it could match that record. And if the permissions for the site's guest user did not allow them to update the email address, it was like read only, then that wouldn't work. But I think you'd see other problems as a result of that.
Yes, that was something that Rita mentioned, is that you need to make sure that the guest site user, so when the forms are submitted, that you do have read-write access to the email field. Thank you for that, Rita. Sorry, Carmen, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say too, what Steve had mentioned earlier about, which I'm sure everyone has probably looked at the email templates as well. It is important to make really explicit directions in the email template. Make sure put the first name and last name and email as you registered, because somebody might put in Brad as opposed to Bradley when they go to sign in or to retrieve their link. Not saying that's going to solve the issue, but that may help the 100% matching.
Okay, thank you.
Great, and thank you for the question. And yes, absolutely. Please come and report back in the Volunteers for Salesforce group if changing your if the matching rules if altering the matching rules does help with this. And otherwise, yeah, please keep in touch with us, and maybe it'll come back on a future office hours. It's an interesting and tricky one. Okay. Ashley had asked a question, and I hope I haven't missed anything important in the meantime, but please shout in chat if you do. Ashley had asked, how do I go about actually entering a new volunteer into the database? Until I get the form up and running, I'm entering them manually. Go on, Ali.
Well, she actually just sent me a follow-up just to me, and Ashley, I'm sorry, I'm going to share with the group. She asked if it was possible to enter a new volunteer without them being associated with a specific job or shift, because in the chat I had previously said that, yeah, you can totally enter a volunteer manually without having the site's stuff live, just by going to the contact in question and entering new volunteer hours on the related list on that, which you're going to see popping up on the screen. I'm not sure who's driving, but thank you. And you can also do that from the volunteer job or shift page itself. But then Ashley just asked if you can enter them without it being associated with a specific job or shift. So yes, there I would go and fill out the information on the contact, which is currently you can see on the screen. You can fill out their skills, interests, availability, and so you can show that, yes, they are a volunteer of my organization, but they aren't currently associated with anything else. If there's some, like if you have a special process where your volunteers have to get background checked or something, that's a great way to take care of showing their interest and availability and such. Ashley, is that kind of where you were hoping we'd go with that? I want to make sure I'm answering the question if possible.
I think she just left.
Well, bummer.
It was not what you said. It was not.
Nothing you said. Okay. All right. Well,
I hope I'm not being offensive today.
For the benefit of everybody else, this is, yes, you can indeed enter volunteers because they're basically just contacts, aren't they?
Volunteers are just, the volunteer records is just a way of bringing in a new type of information to a new type of information into the data you've already got on your donors and your supporters and whatever else you may have on them. Like if you're a patron manager user, their ticket buying information as well. Oh, Ashley is still here apparently because I just got a follow-up chat. And Ashley, if you don't want me reading these out, please let me know. She said she asked because she gets emails all the time from their members who are looking to get involved, but a lot of the time they don't have any volunteer opportunities available at that time. However, she'd still like to be able to document their information within Salesforce. Yeah, so if they are not already contacts within Salesforce, definitely create a contact with their general information and then fill out the information you see in the volunteer information section that's on the contact. And that way, when you do have it, you can pull a report of all the people who have expressed interest as a volunteer or have volunteered in your previous opportunities in the past, and send them an email, give them a call, whatever your usual process is. Oh yes, and the Find Volunteers tab, which I haven't actually used, so I'll defer to somebody else talking about that.
You could, I think, also, if you haven't had an opportunity for them yet, you can also use all of those volunteer fields with leads, can't you? Does anyone else use leads as a sort of holding place for volunteers before they actually volunteer?
Drew, this sounds like something you would do.
We don't, but one thing I was just going to mention is that you can use the volunteer status. And you could customize that if you wanted, but you could have them not be an active volunteer but I think the default includes a prospective maybe or prospect. It depends on how you set it up, but you know, so you could, if you have someone that says, I'm interested in volunteering, but they have not volunteered yet, you could make them a, you know, have a status that reflects that. And it just makes reporting easier to, you know, to do it that way if you want to.
And what we do is the iframe will create a new contact. That contact will automatically be labeled a new sign up or a new web sign up. And then what we do is when someone does come to an orientation that we have, they're already in the system and we just switch them to active. And so our reporting only pulls off of our active volunteers, but we also add the information, the new sign up information. We're still going to give that information to our development team so that we can still be in contact with those people who haven't been to orientation and they can still be a part of our organization.
That's great. That's a great way to do it. And thank you, Michael. You're Michael Slanik at Interlochen, because he says he's also using this idea of the prospective status and also potentially having a campaign of presumably volunteer prospects. That's great. Okay. Now, let's hope that I didn't miss. Let's see. Roger has another question, which follows up on personal sites. How could I customize the personal site to have a page that lists the volunteer jobs that a specific volunteer is eligible to sign up for? Okay. Yes, this could get into a big topic, but we have about 5 minutes. So this, I think, is getting into the idea of instead of there just being a sort of complete set of list, you know, that all jobs and all shifts are listed in the same place. Is there a way to filter how jobs and shifts are listed so that they might be specific to, I think in this case, the particular skills that a volunteer has been trained for? Any thoughts on that?
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. This thing is the audio, it won't let me mute or unmute, so I'm not quite sure where I am on this.
But this is Rita, presumably. Hi, Rita.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
Great.
Rita.
Go.
Yeah.
Go
so I'm thinking that if you need to restrict them to certain skills, like if you're only eligible for certain things, you would probably have to do some kind of process on the back end, and then probably display a custom Visualforce page that says, you know, sorry, you're not eligible, or something like that. It would take some more customization to do that.
I can tell you at our organization, I believe what we can do and what we're doing right now is we have a validation rule that only allows certain volunteers to sign up for certain shifts that are on the site. So all of our shifts are up there, but we don't allow the guest site user to sign themselves up if the contact isn't at least a certain age. So I do know that there are ways to prevent certain volunteers from signing up from certain shifts, but I believe that's going to have to be a validation rule, and that's going to be a pretty high level task.
I mean, in terms of restricting, if you want to restrict certain, you know, jobs or kind of group jobs and shifts, certainly the easiest way to do it is campaigns, because you can just show things for a specific campaign, can't you? I think that's a little more difficult to do perhaps with skills. It certainly helps if you have a specific time frame, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I think Roger's question, which I think the basic answer is you can't, but just to make sure I'm understanding his question right, when you're on a personal site and you can volunteer from there, the question is, how do you restrict the list of jobs that shows to a particular person? And the short answer is you can't. Unfortunately, it's just the way, the way the system is set up, that it's not really, those pages are not fully aware of the contact that that is in there. So it would require either custom development to change the entire behavior and the features. I think that may even be on the features request roadmap, but it's not an easy task. We looked at that. We had some custom development done, and what we opted for is being able to restrict which jobs people could report hours against, but that's not the same thing as which shift they can sign up for.
I have a client who got kind of nifty with their CSS on the personal site, and so they had jobs that were in specific campaigns, and they created actually a series of tabs on the personal site, because normally you just get one sign up tab for all jobs, but I did post that in the hub a little while ago, and I'm frantically looking for the screenshot, but just so it's not like all of it didn't restrict it so that you couldn't see the jobs at all, but they had grouped them into various categories, and from the personal site the volunteer could click on a specific category in order to see just the listings for that. But those restrictions were being done by campaigns, and then it was actually in the website formatting, the CSS, that he kind of exposed the different campaigns as separate tabs. But that's the only way I've seen it done. And as you said, Steve, that doesn't actually sort of limit what you can see. It's just kind of grouping what you can see. So it's helping the format, but it's not restricting which ones you can sign up. Great. We have maybe 2 more minutes, so don't ask any more complex questions, please. Ali is just asking me if I found some screenshots. Maybe I'd like to look at that link. Thank you. I'm going to start winding up slightly. So thank you very much. This has been a fabulous session. There have been some great ideas, and thank you for some good questions. And thank you to our team of experts who've done a fabulous job of fielding them. I hope we got to everything. And thank you also those of you who just joined into the conversation, particularly Drew and Elizabeth, and those who were commenting on chat. This has been great. So as I say, I have been recording the session. I know there aren't a lot of visuals, but I hope the recordings worked well, and you can find it in the hub. So yeah, fabulous. We'll see you all in the Volunteers for Salesforce group in the Power of Us hub, because you see now what awesome people are there and how helpful they are. And we'll be back with a general Q&A office hours session next week on the 1st of October, the first Friday in October. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation, and have a fabulous weekend.